Presenting now is Dion Malcolm Eaby-Lomas. He is an Oppenheimer Memorial Trust Scholar doing his PhD at the University of Cape Town. During his time at UCT, he has been awarded the Humanities Faculty Scholarship, 2 class medals, and the Gunther Pulvermacher Essay Prize. He received a Masters of Music with distinction from UCT in 2023 with a thesis titled Goito's Legacy of Aestheticizing Freedom, Amapiano in Langa Township and the World. This work highlights the distinctive way in which the Black Township electronic dance music uses a wide array of sensory forms to imagine and aestheticize freedom, connecting listeners throughout the world. His new project is titled Ama Technology, Production, Performance, and Consumption of Amapiano from Township to the World. It focuses on the creative and innovative ways that Township producers have used various technologies, digital music production, DJing, and social media to create Amapiano and share it with the world, and how practitioners across the world continue to do this in his new locations. He will be presenting Amapiano Movement, representing digital African popular music from Township to the world.
You'll see that there's a happy birthday sign behind me. It was my brother's birthday yesterday, but I did hear that we sang happy birthday earlier. I think that was to Prof. Ogawu. I think for September, but anyway, I'm celebrating in Cape Town as well. All right, let me start. Number one, I stand up from the chair, heart racing. Another producer who I haven't met yet sits down to take my place, quickly outlining some bass lines for the project. Amigo excitedly embraces me and sings back the melody that I had added. He then returns to the group, dancing around the ring light as they live stream the session. The excitement builds as the track begins to take shape. The 8 or so artists, producers, and friends in attendance flow in and out of the room. It is now Amigo's turn to record vocals. He sings of us partying together, which we will do after the session is finished. But his lyrics imagine a party in London. I'm going home. The DJ drops the volume and the crowd becomes audible as they loudly proclaim, Minagi Kaya. Lima Crazy holds the mic out to signal that he wants to hear them again, and he does. Hundreds of phones are raised above the crowd to record or live stream this moment. Someone next to me makes eye contact before dancing as though he is driving a car or a taxi, a dance move which is seen throughout the song's music video. I respond with another dance from the video. I wasn't expecting that, he shouts into my ear before embracing me and then continuing to dance with his friends. It is likely that he wasn't expecting a white man to know that specific dance move, a point I'll come back to later. His strong British accent was unexpected for me, too, and I am reminded that this crowd of almost 2,000 people have gathered in Nottingham, United Kingdom. They sing about how great the Township party is and how they want to go home, back to townships that most of them have never seen. 3. I am up at 5:30 a.m. this morning. I miscalculated the time difference between Cape Town and Japan, and so the interview is set to start at 6 a.m. After a quick shower, I check my Instagram DMs to find a message from Audio909 that read, just so you know, I can't really speak or understand spoken English, so I think it's better if we communicate via chat. I was planning to use translation tools and base our conversation on text. I'm surprised. He uses English on his public profiles, and we have been messaging in English up until now. We chat for a focused 3.5 hours about the reception of Amapiano in Japan, his work to localize Amapiano there, his first exposure to the music, and his publications. We share music recommendations. He also points me to others that I could contact. The entire conversation of 130 messages is mediated through Google Translate. Hello, good afternoon. I am Dion Malcolm Eaby-Lomas, a student and lecturer from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. I have also become a father in the last 3 weeks. And to be honest, that feels like the only position I currently hold. The title of my presentation today is Amapiano Movements Representing Digital African Popular Music from Township to the World. I've been researching Amapiano since 2021 when I began my master's degree, and I am now busy with a PhD which is titled Technology, Production, Performance, and Consumption of Amapiano from Township to the World. Amapiano is a digitally produced dance music which originated from the Black Townships surrounding Pretoria and Johannesburg. Sorry, I must actually go back here. The townships were set up as part of the apartheid government racist segregationist policies. The post-apartheid government continues to fail township residents who suffer from a lack from harsh socioeconomic conditions, which include overcrowding, unemployment, lack of access to transport, and basic service delivery. Yet out of these tech limiting circumstances emerges a tech-centric music, which is both highly innovative, stretching the available technology to its limits, creating a musical culture that has dominated local music consumption and continues to grow across the continent and the world. My current research then aims to illuminate the relationships between Amapiano practitioners and the technology they use while making, performing, and sharing their music. I want to understand their creative approaches to tech usage and how the technologies have shaped the musical culture. The above snippets from my field work illustrate the new kind of scene that Amapiano represents. Music is typically made in physical studio spaces, which are shared by many. However, these sessions are regularly live streamed to build excitement about upcoming music amongst fans. The producers themselves learn to produce through YouTube tutorials and work entirely in digital audio workstations. Songs are then shared widely to streaming services and through WhatsApp and email. DJs in turn play songs that they have received, pirated, or produced themselves to crowds who found out about the events through social media. DJs and audience members will perform dances they've seen on TikTok or on music videos, which were shared through YouTube. Audience members curate playlists based on these experiences. Photos and videos captured on the evening by organizers and the crowd will be shared widely on social media. And at the same time, Amapiano culture is also rooted in physical spaces, relying on a party and DJ performance for a sense of shared experience. It is firmly established in the townships of Gauteng, not only historically, but also culturally. International parties aim to emulate ones that happen in the township. Local lived realities of township residents are crucial to authenticate artists. Township aesthetics, including cars, taxis, locations, and fashion, are embraced even as the socioeconomic conditions of the township are often rejected. And then song lyrics in township languages also further praise the township. So I would like to argue that Amapiano represents a new kind of field. It is neither entirely online nor offline, and the relationship between the online and the offline is constantly being navigated. Today, my aim is to reflect on the field work that I've done so far, to bring these into conversation with Kofi Agawu's book, Representing African Music, specifically the ninth chapter of his book, The Ethics of Representation, in which Professor Agawu asks important questions about the ethics of fieldwork and whether ethical fieldwork is indeed possible. So my research question at the top there is how do Amapiano practitioners' innovative uses of technology across production, performance, and consumption shape the sound and culture of Amapiano music from township to the world? So my ethnography is then responding to this question, and I'm asking how can I go about answering this question? If I am to understand Amapiano as it moves across sites and between online and offline spaces, I needed to devise a fieldwork method that was equally flexible and dynamic. First, I wanted to include digital ethnography. As Anne Boulay states in her early literature review of digital ethnography, the internet will creep into ethnographies as anthropologists follow their subjects and are more or less forced to follow them online. Angela Deli Paoli and Valentina De Oria point to the blurring of boundaries between online and real-life identities, arguing that separating them is scientifically and practically ineffective. Forberg and Schilt argue for a distinction between digital ethnography and digital research more generally, positing that the former requires self-presentation and co-presence as opposed to content and discourse analysis. They suggest that participation online can range from, quote, becoming an orc in a virtual guild to posting fit pics on Instagram, end quote, so long as the ethnographer is embedded in the data themselves. Przybylski similarly suggests participation, including posting, as part of deep hanging out online. To add to this, several authors have noted that lurking or non-participation in online spaces can lead to the researcher missing important parts of the experience. I thus saw social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp, and YouTube as both extensions of real-world field sites and field sites in themselves. Another important aspect of this and crucial for the project for me to get an understanding of how Amapiano functions within the townships it originates, but also to see how the music travels and what scenes dedicated to the music might look like around the world. Paoli and D'Oria argue that digital ethnography provides an opportunity to expand the geographic dimensions of a project, and this has allowed me to include voices in places might connect to one another. I've used George Marcus's 1995 multi-sited ethnographies. To quote him, this mode defines for itself an object of study that cannot be accounted for ethnographically by remaining focused on a single site of intensive investigation. And then finally, and to bring these two streams of literature together, I have found Liz Przybylski's work on hybrid ethnography helpful. Her work calls for a strong methodology that cuts across both digital and physical field spaces, yet remains rooted in physical spaces, very much like Amapiano. Ethnography, then, which is the way that I think about this, is a method designed to answer specific questions about Amapiano, which aims to move across physical sites and into digital ones in a way that reflects Amapiano's movements, and which is plural and multi-method. Hence, an English translation of ethnography would be simply ethnographies. All right, so what did this actually look like? I began my investigation by learning to use FL Studio, the preferred digital audio workstation of Amapiano producers. I had some experience producing and even producing Amapiano, but I wanted to learn this specific software. I was given a copy by ImageLine and began producing at first for myself, but as these improved, I began sharing them on my personal Instagram account as a producer might. The project took a slight delay with my ethics clearance and the point of this presentation, but this gave me an opportunity to outline a robust framework for the fieldwork. After I received my clearance, I set to work. I began setting up social media profiles for the project on platforms that I identified as favorites within the community, specifically Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I began following and consuming content from well-established artists in South Africa and the UK. I then recorded short-form video content based on the research I had done during my master's. Amapiano artists, DJs, and producers rely on self-promotion to share their work, and this gave me an idea of what that looks like through social media. At the same time, it opened up new networks for contact, and many people reached out to me asking for collaborations, which I took part in online. One video in particular did very well on TikTok, garnering over 140,000 views, which led to a large amount of followers. This actually proved helpful to me later on when I was meeting new participants. I then also conducted some preliminary online interviews with people I had met since finishing my master's. I visited a participant and friend I had made during my master's and took 5 DJ lessons with him, and then he also organized my first DJ gig. And then during this time, I was reaching out to potential participants for the trips that I would take, taking note of parties I could attend, securing funding, and planning the travel itineraries. Then on the 1st of January this year, I flew out to Johannesburg and then Pretoria with my wife and a colleague. Here I participated in studio sessions, which are highly collaborative spaces, attended parties from informal township settings to day festivals, and conducted several interviews. 3 days after returning home, my wife and I flew again to London, where I again joined studio sessions, attended parties, and conducted interviews. I then returned home and continued my online engagements, including online follow-up interviews and interviewing new participants like Audiote 909 from Japan, and also attending a few shows that were closer to me. Now, for Agawu. In the final chapter of his book, Representing African Music, Kofi Agawu gives a candid and brutally honest reflection on the ethics of musical research, focusing on musical ethnography. He illustrates the gap between the ethics of academia as it protects the moral standard of the West and the ethics of the field we actually engage in. The examples he uses are rooted in traditional ways of being in Africa. For example, he discusses the ethics of performance spaces where virtuosity, athleticism, and vocal pyrotechnics are effects of a spiritual and ethical performing attitude rather than an end in themselves, or the special place of insults as ethical sites among Anlo Aware. He asks how these might be incorporated into the ethical representation of these cultures, if such a thing is possible. While I have come to Agawu's work later in the process, Marcus Leaning's quote was quite helpful for me when I was setting this up, as he posits that an alternative ethical measure would be one in which we concentrate on methods that seem in tune with the world in which we exist, rather than seeking to satisfy a set of abstract and possibly theoretically inapplicable ethical codes. My field side is quite different from the ones discussed by Agawu, and reflects the changing global order around which we are convening. But Agawu's statements still ring true. I experienced the gap between the ethics of the field and the abstract codes of academia when my ethics clearance was rejected and returned 3 times, due to my use of social media ethnography, ranging from outright skepticism to nuanced concerns about the details. I argued that to study Amapiano and ignore the digital components would in itself be unethical. I am thankful that several committee members were willing to help me bring these two distinct codes into unity. Agawu then gives very honest reflections of his fieldwork experiences, including a broken promise to a chief, a lie to protect the life of a colleague, and his use of fictional ethnography based on childhood memories and stories. This got me thinking. What of the participant who welcomed me into his home, thinking that my interest in his musical practice was going to be the breakthrough that he needed to get the recording contract, to get his family out of poverty? What about when he hassled me for months afterward, ignoring my attempts to figure out sustainable ways to help him in the long term? Was it ethical that I refused those requests for money? As a student who's relying on funders and tenuous lecturing contracts, what of the producer who lacked his own equipment, who took me to an older producer's house to work? The older producer would then later, because it was his equipment. This was a fascinating moment for my thesis, but on reflection, did I simply sit back and let this happen? Would it have been more ethical of me to step up and protect the younger producer's intellectual property against copyright ethics typical of the field? What about the producer I met? My interest had renewed his enthusiasm. On one hand, this was good news, and he would continue to follow his dream. But following his dream comes at an enormous cost in township settings, to him and to his family. He might never be able to monetize the endless labor of learning the tools of music production, and my presence could have encouraged an even longer term distraction from quote unquote real work. At almost every party I attended, either in South Africa or the UK, I was usually the only white person in attendance. Did I distract from Black solidarity in these spaces with my intrusion? Many participants did their best to ignore me. Others were curious and asked questions, but there were some who saw my presence as a problem. At a gig in Soweto, one attendee viewed my presence with great suspicion, and even got quite physical with me, because he was concerned that I was Afrikaner. What about them privileged allowed me into their township studios, but they would never visit mine, speaking to a tiny minority of participants to represent the whole musical culture? What about the languages I never had to learn how to speak as a white South African, as my participants have to engage in a second or third language even just to participate in my project? These remind me of Agawu's critique of Michel Kuzliak's monograph of the Ba'aka in Central African Republic, specifically where researchers like myself might be guilty of buying egalitarianism, that is, offering lip service to making ourselves equal to our participants, but still entirely in control of the means by which we do this. I spent many hours designing appropriate gestures of reciprocity, editing content to promote their work, connecting locals with international DJs interested in their music, teaching copyright best practice. But who gave me the right to decide what was an appropriate reciprocity? Finally, can I speak for this community? Agawu asks whether an ethnography based on a short period of fieldwork could ever be ethically sound, later drawing attention to researchers using interactions with a few to represent the many. Similarly, Gabrielle de Seta frames the digital ethnographer as an expert fabricator, one that has access to endless seas of data to carve out their own narrative or argument. There are so many within this community already inscribing musical culture. What can I offer as an outsider? And how can I make my impact transparent while still contributing to the discourse? At a glance, one might take Agawu's points here and the points that I have raised as pessimistic and defeatist. Rather than attempt to answer any of the questions he has raised, I've simply just added nuance. However, the point of this exercise is to engage critically with the ethics on music research. He makes this beautifully, and I'm going to end with this quote. It is tempting to declare the impossibility of ethics even before we have begun a formal investigation, but this would be perverse. Highlighting the difficulty at the offset, at the outset, should make us work harder to finding the conditions of possibility for irrelevant ethics. Swimming against a strong tide, we aim to resist the stubborn skepticism of those who find the status quo perfectly adequate and for whom talk of ethics threatens to remove some of their privileges. While Amapiano shakes the status quo of music consumption in South Africa, the continent, and abroad, it also has the potential to shake up the status quo within ethnography and music studies more broadly. While this new kind of field with new ethical issues and old ones, it is certainly worth the swim to understand these musics, the people who make them better, and to uncover how to study music ethically, if such a thing is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Dion, I was gonna say Aaron. Thank you, Dion. And also congratulations on your new status as a father. Um, yeah, very provocative presentation. Do we have questions in the room or online? Okay, Aaron raised his hand, so we'll take Aaron first. Please be very brief with your questions. I think we have about 6, 7 minutes. All right, Aaron. You're muted, Aaron.
I think Oladele had his hand up before me, actually.
Yeah, just,
But
just go ahead.
okay. Fascinating presentation, Dion. Check the chat. I sent you 3 things that I think you should buy as a new father. A diaper pail, a corral, and something to warm wet wipes with. Those are 3 things that saved us when our son was born. Also divide and conquer, split between the two of you, or if you have relatives, bring them on board so you can sleep more in the first weeks. But
Thank you.
congratulations, that's amazing news. A quick question. Um, this whole business about digital ethnography and that being a real chafing point with getting your research clearance, I was wondering if you could expand on that and why digital ethnography in particular was I mean, if you were ever given an explanation as to why that was problematic, it seems like digital ethnography would be one of the things you could even do remotely. So why would they care whether you were physically in the country at the time or not?
Mm. Yeah, I think so. I think maybe one of the biggest issues that came up was the fact that UCT had recently decided, so University of Cape Town had recently started writing their policy on social media ethics, and I think that what had happened is that the person who was heading up the committee had kind of misunderstood that as like that was the first policy on social media ethics. I think that the person, yeah, I don't want to say I don't want to say too much about. Um, I have this was a particular issue I had with a particular person for sure, who kind of just was not understanding what I meant by social media ethnography, had not really exposed themselves to any of that kind of research, and that had been a big part. So I think like maybe that I've read quite a bit about people's experience with ethics boards being these like really like stalwarts of old ideas about ethnography and the way that we ours in particular, like our music department is a classical music department with a jazz department and then an African music department, and the African music department is where the ethnography happens. So like there's always this kind of like our projects are always scrutinized much more heavily than any other one, where people are just interviewing composers that are already in the department. And then I think mine just added a couple extra layers to that. Yeah, I think it was complicated. I think there were other people on the committee that were incredibly helpful for me. And I think that the project, like so much of what I'm talking about now, happened as a result of the process being delayed. But yeah, it was. I can reflect on it now in a fairly neutral way. I was pretty miffed. I think it took like 4 months for me to actually get it like moving. Yeah, it was horrible.
All right. Dr.
Thanks,
Albert.
Dion.
Oh, okay, sir. Dion, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Congratulations for being a father. I hope you will not have sleepless nights and it may interfere with your research, traveling around anyhow. But congratulations. I want to ask you just two questions. Very quick one. Why do you think Amapiano is a movement? What does it represent? Then the second one is I can't remember you acknowledging the fact that Amapiano is a hybrid. You know, there's a fusion of deep house jazz and Afrobeats, Nigerian Afrobeat, specifically. And is there any connection between this and the movement that you in your title you say it's a movement? I just want to understand the little intricacies.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, the movement in my title is kind of it means a few different things. I do see Amapiano as a movement more generally, and I think like in South Africa there's been a long-term need for sort of youth solidarity, young people in South Africa to gather together. Amapiano creates this space that they do that around. And I think that it's a youth movement in that sense. There's a lot about it that is very it's like I want to say it's like an inward looking culture where there's like specific words that are associated with the culture. There's a specific way of dressing that's associated with the culture. There's specific like phrases and ways of understanding the world that are associated with the culture. And I think all of those things kind of represent a movement. And I think then so that's one of the sort of three meanings I have behind movement. The second is actually just that so much of my research is looking at how it moves, right? How it's moving between spaces, how it's moving from Joburg and Pretoria to other parts, like I mean to how it moves to Cape Town, but then also how it meves to the UK, how it moves. I mean, I don't have a chance to do how it moves to Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya and the States and Japan, and like I can't do all of these things, but like just kind of generally how the music moves. And then there's also this kind of little play in the fact that like Amapiano has so much to do with dance. So there are these kind of movements. In my original thinking about this presentation, I was going to focus more on TikTok dances. But just it happened that I kind of like it just didn't. Yeah. So that third ambiguity didn't really like come up. But it is kind of part of my thinking about it. And then it's also like, like if we think movement, we tend to think like political movement. It's definitely not a political movement. In other sense, it's a political movement in that fact that it's not a political movement. It's like a kind of very apolitical move in South African politics. And then you've got like someone like Focalistic who's considered to be President Jastrata, which is like the president of the streets, and he gives State of the Nation addresses, which are very irreverent, like anti-politics kind of moves, which I think are fascinating. And then the hybrid thing. So there's a lot of different influence for Amapiano. I think Amapiano artists are quite aware of that. There's a lot of influence from within Township house musics. And then there's a lot of influence from outside. So I think like the biggest one is deep house. I think recently, or not recently, but I would say like as soon as it started going global, Afrobeats had a huge impact on it because they were operating in the same space, and a lot of Nigerian artists were starting to incorporate Amapiano in their Amapiano sounds in their Afrobeats. And I think it was also Afrobeats was just huge and is very popular in South Africa as well. So it would have had those influences. But as far as like how to trace all of those influences, it's actually really tough. Yeah, and I have an article called Kwaito as History, in which I try and do a little bit of that, which was published through African Music last year.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So
Thank
thanks,
you.
Dion. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Dr. Albert. And thanks to everyone on Zoom and also people in the room. And this is the end of this session. And Dr. Ayorinde, over to you folks in Lagos. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alaba.
Sorry, we cannot get to the question in the room. I think we're already out of time. But if Dr. Ayorinde would allow us, then we can take it. But otherwise, I'm just keeping to time. I don't think we're allowed to take the question. All right, this is thanks so much, Break in Lagos. Again, Dion, thanks for your wonderful work and congratulations again. Thanks, Aaron.
Sure.
Provocative discussion, and thanks, Dr. Albert. One thing I might add is you should check out Professor Agawu's writing on, I don't remember what chapter, but he said, popular music is highly promiscuous. And I thought that was very profound. So when you talk about popular music being eclectic, I don't think there's any other way to define it than it is actually very promiscuous. All right, this is the end. I'm not giving a lecture. Bye, everyone. Take care.
So long.
Thank you so much.